Happy Wednesday. Good morning. Welcome to Link Live. My name is Marina Mayer, Editor-in-Chief of Food Logistics and Supply and Demand Chain Executive. I'm here with my lovely editorial staff. If you want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Brielle Jacob. I'm the Associate Editor.
And I am McKenna Morales, and I am the Assistant Editor.
And if you have not figured out yet, we have a wonderful guest joining us today. We have Luisa Fernandez-Willey, the Assistant Vice President, Policy and Economics with the Association of American Railroads. And she's here to help us talk about rail trends and impacts from supply chain disruptions, opportunities for 2021, and basically anything you need to know about rail going into the new year. So Luisa, thank you so much for joining our program today.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
And absolutely. So before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping items. I know we've had a couple emails come through this morning about Food Logistics Top Green Providers Award. We're very excited. Registration. Nominations open Monday, February 8th. So get those nominations in. We're very, very excited. Registration is open for our upcoming SCN Summit on Sustainability. That takes place February 23rd and February 25th. So make sure you register that. I'll put the registration links and everything you need to know in the chat session. But back to what we're really here to talk about is with Luisa. Let's talk rail trends. You ready?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. So as we all know, COVID hit. What kind of growth did rail experience, and what kind of categories experienced higher growth than others?
Well, Marina, the freight railroad industry faced unprecedented challenges in 2020. But as one of the oldest industries and one of the most resilient, we continue to deliver to our businesses, our customers, and to the nation. Now, there wasn't probably a single rail customer that didn't experience some sort of decline in their volumes or experience an increase in their volumes. But before I can start telling you about what actually the gains that we saw, let me take a little step back and show you how our supply, our logistics are all tied together. Now, when the economy shut down back in March, you think, oh gosh, that particular industry shut down, and the impact is isolated to that particular industry. But that's not the case. So let me use as an example the auto industry. So when the auto industry shut down, the volume of finished vehicles and auto parts just completely declined. And in fact, in the month of May, we were seeing the percentage decline from the previous year was like 97% down. But then it is not just the finished products, but it's also the raw materials that go into putting together a vehicle. So things like, aluminum and steel and, plastics and the sand used for glass making that were not really moving. Now, when we all had to stay home, we were not driving to work. Like, for instance, I wasn't driving into downtown DC, the 16 miles a day. So when you're not driving, you're not putting gas in your car. So what happens? Well, the ethanol production was also impacted because when, ethanol goes into gas. And when ethanol is not being produced, then you don't produce dry distillers grain, which is a byproduct of ethanol. And then by result, you also do not produce as much animal feed. So in this particular example, you can see how all these little things are interconnected. Now, to answer your question, what experienced growth? Well, the economy opened up in the middle of the year. So we saw an increase in auto vehicle and parts movements. So this is what economists love to say, this is a perfect V-shaped recovery. And it was truly a perfect V-shaped recovery. We also saw that ethanol reached pre-pandemic levels. Also, there was an increase of plastic resins, which is primarily used in the production of personal protective equipment, within the pandemic that was, in high demand. We also saw an increase in grain shipments, particularly soybeans that were for exports. And with this anticipation of, the demand for grains, we also saw an increase in fertilizers. So, so it kind of gives you an idea of all the different commodities that experience growth, as the economy reopened. But I mean, we're definitely, the nation is far from, the fight against COVID is far from over, and the railroad is ready to continue delivering to the customers and support the economic recovery.
Mm. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
But do you guys remember how cheap gas was?
Right.
At the beginning of the pandemic, it was like in Wisconsin, it was 98 cents.
Yeah.
Wow.
And to Luisa's point, I remember being like mad about it because I'm like, I'm not driving anywhere. So this must be no good.
No, I hear you. I think I filled up the same tank of gas. It lasted me for like a month and a half or something.
Yes.
We were not going anywhere.
Right. In months prior, I think it was right before the pandemic hit, I wrote a couple articles actually focused on rail. And I was so interested, and it makes sense. But a lot of the experts were discussing how rail is being used for long haul more so than the last mile is really focused on trucking, and that in the future that's going to be really compounded and like more of a thing. Can you explain how rail is used for the long haul, especially because I wrote that before COVID? I'm interested to see what it's like now.
Yeah, absolutely. So truckers are our biggest competitors, but also our biggest, partners. So when, for the last mile, we will need to work with our trucking partners just to get those goods to our customers. Now, the future clearly involves both of us. But as the U.S. economy continues to grow, there's going to be a demand for additional freight, which goes to your point. And in fact, there's an article from the Department of Transportation that says that by 2040, the demand for freight is going to grow 30%. So if you think about it, it's like, where is this freight going to go? Like, is it going to go in rail or truck? And rail has a competitive advantage over our trucking partners. And just simply summarize 3 things that gives us the competitive advantage. So I did say 3. There you go. So we produce less emissions. We consume less fuel. And we also, by taking all those trucks off the highway, we relieve some of this congestion. So, on average, like I'm going to give you like the best factoid ever. Railroads move an average 1 ton of freight, 470 miles in 1 gallon of gas. Now think about that. Let that sink in.
1 gallon?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right. So when you think about it, the long haul and the economies of scale and all that, rail just has the competitive advantage. But we will need to continue working with our trucking partners.
Right. Has that changed at all because I know everyone's focused on micro fulfillment right now, or like fulfillment centers like closer to customers, and COVID really like pushed that forward. Has that made a difference?
Well, you still have to get all these like consumer goods from imports. So when you have the imports that go to the ports, they go on rail and then they get transloaded eventually. But that's still the same pattern. And our intermodal volumes, which I did not mention in the previous question. So intermodal is the movement of like trailers and containers. So we actually saw record-breaking numbers in the month of November and December, and they were primarily due to imports and e-commerce. So when you think about the things that are moving containers, we're talking about things like, what you will find in the big box stores or in e-commerce, online retailers. So, I mean, Intermodal has been doing fantastic. I mean, obviously it did suffer at the beginning of the pandemic, but it has recovered. And in fact, this last month, we just released numbers that Intermodal also posted records in the month of January.
Wow.
And just going back, you like very briefly mentioned soybeans like 10 minutes ago, probably. But I know that was such a big deal during the trade war with China in 2019. But have you seen any other trends in the business segment for agriculture and food?
Yeah, definitely. This is a great question. I mean, I didn't know much about soybeans until the trade war happened. Right. And that's now my favorite, grain because it's just always in the news. So real participation in the agricultural industry is critical, and this relationship has always been there. So as long as people need to eat, rail is going to be there. I mean, also, most of us were baking a lot during the pandemic. I mean, surely I was. So just to give you a sense of, about, agriculture and farm products, let me just give a little bit of background and what it means for the rail industry, for the railroad industry. So when you think about agriculture and fruit products and grain meal products, that accounts for 18% of our carload business. When I talk about the agriculture, and basically it includes things like soybeans and sorghum and corn and wheat and flour and cereal and canned goods and poultry and just name it, all these different things. But grain truly is a big chunk of this percentage. And grain, 60% of it is for domestic consumption. So that would be, it tracks with the population, it's super stable. It doesn't have those huge fluctuations that you would see with the exports. But then here we have the other 40% is for exports. It's highly volatile, and it is impacted by trade policy, which is, kind of what you were talking about. So when the trade war with China, developed back in 2018, we saw this surge of shipments in 2018 because folks, they knew it was coming, the tariffs were coming, so they were sending all the shipments in inland, and also some of them were expecting additional tariffs. So we saw these huge volumes in grain in 2018, but then in 2019, it went down again. But then 2020 shows up, then we have the pandemic, but then eventually soybeans and the grains started recovering. And towards the last part of 2020, soybeans led the way in terms of exports, and that they were primarily going to China. And in order to meet that surge of exports, the railroads had to run, they had to switch gears. They had to run shuttle trains. And if you don't know what a shuttle train is, it's basically you have a dedicated train that goes back and forth between a certain locations. So what they ended up doing, these shuttle trains were running, from say the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest ports, and then they were going back to the Gulf and so on in order to meet that demand. Soybeans were basically off the charts. And if you were to look at data from the Department of Agriculture, you were to see like literally there's like a huge line for exports for soybeans. Sorghum also did pretty good too. And as a whole, grain did very well last year, and it did posted increases in comparison to 2019. And the same thing with food products and grain meal products and all that, the whole baking and all that cooking that everybody was doing at home.
I know, everybody made bread. I made really bad.
I know.
I made a lot of bread, and I was
curious. I'm curious how it did this month, since it's January and everyone's doing, like New Year's resolutions. I know I haven't been able to eat because I've been on a detox. I haven't eaten grain in a month. Today's my first day I can have it.
Our grain data still was very strong in the month of January. So I think people are still cooking and baking and getting creative in the kitchen.
Do you think these trends are going to be consistent because more people are getting used to cooking at home?
That's a really good question, and it's kind of hard to tell. Like, I wish I had a magic ball to see, but I mean, I think, and I personally see it, that I feel like once the pandemic, it's under control and, everybody gets to go out and do things, people are just going to be unleashed. But that is just my personal opinion, that I'm really looking forward to being out and sit at a restaurant and order a meal indoors.
Right.
So, but it obviously it's kind of hard to tell. Like I said, the pandemic is far from over and we're still fighting it.
So I'm curious about something. It's like not COVID related, for one. So I know that a lot of other countries have high speed rail, and that the US is kind of lacking in that area. I'm curious if they're likely to get high speed rail soon, and other ways that the rail industry is remaining relevant and modernizing.
Well, that's an excellent question. And one thing that a lot of people do not know is that the American Rail Network is actually privately owned. Like, the railroads own their own track, and
Right.
we build, we maintain, and pay for the infrastructure, ourselves. And in fact, we invest about $25 billion annually to maintain, our network. And that was a B with a billion, not millions. So when I think about how are we relevant, and the one thing that you kind of have to keep in mind is also that, we're very technologically advanced. Like when a lot of people think about the railroads, this is not your grandfather's network. I mean, these are very high tech. There's a lot of high tech technology. There's a lot of projects that, have been implemented to continue to keep the rails moving, efficiently and safely. And, just to give you an example, last year, the implementation of positive train control was completed, or PTC. And that was a $12 billion project that is going to continue keeping the industry, running safe, operating safely and efficiently. But that's not all. I mean, we got a lot of different technology implemented throughout, the entire network that keeps the railroad moving very safely. Now, in terms of fast speed rail, I mean, that, you generally see it in other countries where, the government owns that kind of infrastructure. So it's
Right.
it's very different. I mean, here, like I said, it's a 140,000 mile rail network that is, top notch, the envy of the world. I mean, it is very well maintained. And, when you think about our network, it's like an assembly line, of if you have all these big goods that need to be moved, you just put it by rail. I mean, that's just the natural solution or choice.
What's the coolest technology you've seen with rail?
I would have to say the ground penetrating radar. So basically, it's just this radar that goes into the earth, and it tells you if there's like excess moisture. And if there's excess moisture, it could potentially lead to like a derailment, because then obviously the ground is going to move, and it's the ballast and the track, So I think that's actually really cool. But there's also sensors where that it goes along on the tracks, that when if a rail car passes, it can tell you where there's also defects on the track. So it's I mean, there's the AAR. We have a subsidiary called it TTCI, and they do all these like technological and studies and whatnot. And some of the things that you see are just incredible that you would never imagine. Like, again, people think that we're very old school and all that, but all this technology shows that we're really forward thinking.
Yeah, I have a question. With the new Biden administration, he's signing these laws, and he has these visions of what's called a second great railroad revolution. What do you see? I know you said you don't have that crystal ball, but what do you kind of envision with some of these changes and how that will impact rail?
Well, it's really hard to tell, but the one thing that I will tell you, that the railroad industry is ready to work with the new administration, and we will do our part to continue the economy moving forward.
So what other kind of trends or technologies do you see kind of coming up, into the new year? I know that, you said the pandemic is still here to stay for a while, but people, I feel like, are starting to, once they get vaccinated, turn that corner and return to somewhat of a normalcy existence. Kind of what are some of the predictions you have?
Well, in terms of predictions, the AR doesn't really do predictions. We don't do our forecast, but I can tell you a few things.
Okay.
So last week it was earning calls, and during the earning calls, the Class 1 railroads, they all indicated a sense of optimism for 2021, at least for the second half of the year. They're still a little cautious about the first quarter, and that's mainly due to the lockdowns that are currently in place across several different states where they operate. Now, the other thing that I want you to think about is, the fortunes of the railroad industry rise and fall with the U.S. economy. So when you think about the economy, and I'm going to take you back to, economics 101 here. When you think about the economy, so this is like gross domestic product, the sum of all the goods and services that are produced, in the nation. The largest component is actually consumption. So it's 70% of the economy. So that is, buying goods and services, and the railroads move goods, all these big things. So the best way to think about what's going to happen to the economy is by looking at those particular key commodities or sectors. And the best way to look at that is what some of these like trade association economists are saying, or even some government agencies. And I'm going to give you a few examples that's going to give you a really good sense of what do we see. Now, I'm going to start with the chemicals. So the American Chemistry Council, they're expecting their industry to grow this year, and particularly the basic chemicals, things like plastic resins, like I mentioned earlier, that is the personal protective equipment and whatnot, and also synthetic rubber. The National Association of Manufacturers, they're basically saying that by the second half of the year, they expect manufacturing to reach pre-pandemic levels. So what does that mean for rail? Well, if you were to look at our industrial products, so that would be things like, the autos and the lumber and the aluminum and paper and steel and sand and all those different things, those are part of manufacturing. So they're all these raw materials that are involved in the manufacturing sector. So that's another example. Also, the National Automobile Dealers Association, they're saying that, auto sales are going to exceed the volumes that they saw, in 2020. So that's also, a bright spot, because like I mentioned earlier, if they're producing more vehicles, there's going to be an increase in movement of auto parts and the steel and the plastic and all those different things. And then last but not least, we have the Energy Information Administration. So they released a forecast about coal generation. And when you think about electricity generation, it's, generated using, natural gas and coal and whatnot. So they're expecting electricity generation from coal to increase this year. So that would be, there in 2020 was only 20% of electricity generation. So now coal is going to go up to 24% of electricity generation. Still, natural gas is the main, has the largest share for electricity generation.
It's fascinating, just fascinating stuff. I think that technology is pretty cool too, because I feel like something like that could, I understand for derailment, but that saves lives. So I think that's super fascinating.
Yeah, and safety it's the railroad's number one priority. So what the railroads does, this is why we invest so much money on our network, and there's all these all this technology that is implemented with that single thing in mind, safety.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect. Well, Luisa, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you joining our program today. I know I learned a lot. Rail is such an interesting factor of our industry. And so I appreciate your time and joining us today.
Thank you for your invitation and meeting you in person.
Absolutely. I know, right?
Yes.
To all of our viewers, thank you for being a part of our program today as well. Make sure you check out foodlogistics.com, sdcexec.com to read. We have new blog posts, we have videos, we have download our Link podcast channel. We have so much going on. Make sure you keep an eye out for Food Logistics Top Green Providers Award, which again opens Monday, February 8th, and registration for our SEN Summit sessions. So make sure you go to our websites to learn about that. And I hope to see you again next week at 11 a.m. Central, where we'll be talking with Justin Goldston, professor and coordinator of project and supply chain management at Penn State University, to discuss supply chain education, what it means to be a frontliner, and what's in store for young supply chain professionals of the future. Thank you very much for your time today, and we'll see you again next week, 11 a.m. Central. Thank you.